Eugène Emmanuel Viollet-le-Duc was a French architect and theorist, famous for his interpretive restorations of medieval buildings. Born in Paris, he was a major Gothic revival architect. His works were largely restorative and few of his independent building designs were ever realized. Strongly contrary to the prevailing Beaux-Arts architectural trend of his time, much of his design work was largely derided by his contemporaries. He was the architect hired to design the internal structure of the Statue of Liberty, but died before the project was completed. Early years. Viollet-le-Duc's father was a civil servant living in Paris who collected books. His mother's Friday salons were attended by Stendhal in Saint-Beuve. His mother's brother, Étienne Jean Delecluse, a painter in the mornings, a scholar in the evenings, was largely in charge of the young man's education. Viollet-le-Duc was trendy philosophically, republican, anti-clerical, rebellious. He built a barricade in the July Revolution of 1830 and refused to enter the École des Beaux-Arts. Instead he opted in favor of direct practical experience in the architectural offices of Jacques-Marie Hervé and Achille Leclerc. Architectural restorer. Restoration work during the early 1830s, a popular sentiment for the restoration of medieval buildings developed in France. Viollet-le-Duc, returning during 1835 from study in Italy, was commissioned by Prosper Mérimée to restore the Romanesque Abbey of Vézelay. This work was the first of a long series of restorations. Viollet-le-Duc's restorations at Notre-Dame de Paris with Jean-Baptiste Lassus brought him national attention. His other main works include Mont Saint-Michel, Carcassonne, Roquetalade Castle and Pierrefonds. Viollet-le-Duc's restorations frequently combined historical fact with creative modification. For example, under his supervision, Notre Dame was not only cleaned and restored, but also updated, gaining its distinctive third tower in addition to other smaller changes. Another of his most famous restorations, the medieval fortified town of Carcassonne, was similarly enhanced, gaining atop each of its many wall towers a set of pointed roofs that are actually more typical of northern France. At the same time, in the cultural atmosphere of the Second Empire, theory necessarily became diluted in practice. Viollet-le-Duc provided a Gothic reliquary for the relic of the Crown of Thorns at Notre Dame in 1862, and yet Napoleon III also commissioned designs for a luxuriously appointed railway carriage from Viollet-le-Duc, in 14th-century Gothic style. Among his restorations were churches: Basilica of St. Mary Magdalene in Vézelay, St. Martin in Clamecy, Notre Dame in Paris, Sainte-Chapelle in Paris, Basilica of Saint Denis near Paris, Saint Louis in Poissy, Notre Dame in Semur-en-Auxois, Basilica of Saint Nazarius and Saint Celsus in Carcassonne, Basilica of Saint Sénine in Toulouse, Notre Dame in Lausanne, Town Hall Saint-Antonin Noble-Val, Narbonne, Castles Château de Roquetalade in Bordeaux, Château de Pierrefonds, Fortified City of Carcassonne, Château de Coucy, Antoing in Belgium, Château de Vincennes, Paris. Restorations by Viollet-le-Duc. Abbey of La Madeleine, Vézelay, Notre Dame de Paris, the keep of the Château de Vincennes, the walled town of Carcassonne, Château de Pierrefonds, Lausanne Cathedral, Switzerland. Influence on historic preservation. Basic intervention theories of historic preservation are framed in the dualism of the retention of the status quo versus a restoration that creates something that never actually existed in the past. John Ruskin was a strong proponent of the former sense, while his contemporary, Viollet-le-Duc, advocated for the latter instance. Viollet-le-Duc wrote that restoration is a means to re-establish a building to a finished state, which may in fact never have actually existed at any given time. The type of restoration employed by Viollet-le-Duc in its English form as Victorian Restoration, was decried by Ruskin as a destruction out of which no remnants can be gathered. A destruction accompanied with false description of the thing destroyed. This argument is still her current one when restoration is being considered for a building or landscape. In removing layers of history from a building, information and age value are also removed which can never be recreated. However, adding features to a building, as Viollet-le-Duc also did, can be more appealing to modern viewers. Publications. Throughout his career, Viollet-le-Duc made notes and drawings, not only for the buildings he was working on, but also on Romanesque, Gothic and Renaissance buildings that were to be soon demolished. His notes were helpful in his published works. His study of medieval and Renaissance periods was not limited to architecture, but extended to furniture, clothing, musical instruments, armament, geology and so forth. All this work was published first in serial, and then as full-scale books, as Dictionary of French Architecture from 11th to 16th century, original language edition, including numerous illustrations. Dictionary of French Furnishings. Introduction sur l'architecture, in which Viollet-le-Duc systematized his approach to architecture and architectural education, in a system radically opposed to that of the École des Beaux-Arts, which he had avoided in his youth and despised. In Henry van Brunt's translation, the Discourses on Architecture was published in 1875, making it available to an American audience little more than a decade after its initial publication in France. Histoire de habitation humaine, depuis les temps préhistoriques jusqu'à nos jours, published in English in 1876 as Habitations of Man in All Ages. Viollet-le-Duc traces the history of domestic architecture among the different races of mankind. Lat Russe, ses origines, ses éléments constructifs, son apogée, son avenir, where Viollet-le-Duc applied his ideas of rational construction to Russian architecture, architectural theory and new building projects. Viollet-le-Duc is considered by many to be the first theorist of modern architecture. Sir John Summerson wrote that, "There have been two supremely eminent theorists in the history of European architecture, Léon Baptiste Albertine, Eugène Viollet-le-Duc." His architectural theory was largely based on finding the ideal forms for specific materials, and using these forms to create buildings. His writings centered on the idea that materials should be used honestly. He believed that the outward appearance of a building should reflect the rational construction of the building. In Introduction sur l'architecture, Viollet-le-Duc praised the Greek temple for its rational representation of its construction. For him, Greek architecture served as a model for the correspondence of structure and appearance. There is speculation that this philosophy was heavily influenced by the writings of John Ruskin, who championed honesty of materials as one of the 7 main emphases of architecture. In several unbuilt projects for new buildings, Viollet-le-Duc applied the lessons he had derived from Gothic architecture, applying its rational structural systems to modern building materials such as cast iron. He also examined organic structures, such as leaves and animal skeletons, for inspiration. He was especially interested in the wings of bats, an influence represented by his assembly hall project. Viollet-le-Duc's drawings of iron work were innovative for the time. Many of his designs emphasizing iron would later influence the Art Nouveau movement, most noticeably in the work of Hector Guimard, Victor Horta, Antony Gaudí or Hendrik Petrus Berlage. His writings inspired some American architects, including Frank Furness, John Wellborn Root, Louis Sullivan, and Frank Lloyd Wright. Military career and influence. Viollet-le-Duc had a second career in the military, primarily in the defense of Paris during the Franco-Prussian War. He was so influenced by the conflicts that during his later years he described the idealized defense of France by the analogy of the military history of La Roche-Ponte. an imaginary castle, in his work Histoire d'une forteresse. Accessible and well-researched, it is partly fictional. Annals of a Fortress strongly influenced French military defensive thinking. Viollet-le-Duc's critique of the effective artillery is so complete that it accurately describes the principles applied to the defense of France until World War II. The physical results of his theories are present in the fortification of Verdun prior to World War I and the Maginot Line prior to World War II. His theories are also represented by the French military theory of deliberate advance, such that artillery and a strong system of fortresses in the rear of an army are essential. Legacy. Some of his restorations, such as that of the Château de Pierrefonds, have become very controversial because they were not intended so much to recreate a historical situation accurately as to create a perfect building of medieval style. To restore an edifice, he observed in the Dictionnaire raisonné, is not to maintain it, repair or rebuild it, but to re-establish it in a complete state that may never have existed at a particular moment. The idea and the very word restoration applied to architecture Viollet-le-Duc considered part of a modern innovation. Modern conservation practice considers Viollet-le-Duc's restorations too free, too personal, too interpretive, but some of the monuments he restored might have been lost otherwise. The English architect Benjamin Buckner was a devotee of Viollet-le-Duc and during 1874 to 1881 translated several of his publications into English, to popularize his principles in Great Britain. The later works of the English designer and architect William Burgess were greatly influenced by Viollet-le-Duc, most strongly in Burgess's designs for his own home, the Tower House in London's Holland Park district, and Burgess's designs for Castell Coch near Cardiff, Wales. An exhibition, Eugène Viollet-le-Duc 1814–1879, was presented in Paris, 1965, and a larger, Centennial exhibition, 1980. Viollet-le-Duc was the subject of a Google Doodle on January 27, 2014. Later life. In 1874 Viollet-le-Duc resigned as diocesan architect of Paris, and was succeeded by his contemporary, Paul Abadie. In his old age, Viollet-le-Duc relocated to Lausanne, Switzerland, where he constructed a villa. He died there in 1879.